Well, you did it, everyone. You made it to the end of the hellscape that is 2020. And if there are 3 certain things in life, they are death, taxes, and an NVZ video on the best video games of that certain year when they did come out. So here we are. We're here to talk about video games. Yeah, I mean, it's probably, other more important things going on in the world right now, but video games were good in 2020, if nothing else. The rest of the world was shit, but I had a lot of fun with some good video games, and as is tradition, I got to tell you about them now. So here we go. Let's take a look at my top 10 games of the year for 2020. Number 10, Haven. There is an unmistakable style to Haven. From the upbeat, sci-fi tinged synthetic soundtrack to alien landscapes that you glide and drift across, there is a cohesion here that really drew me to Haven's world. Following the story of Kay and Yu, 2 escaped lovebirds who have fled a society where everyone is forced into an arranged relationship, Haven is primarily a story about 2 people who have no one but each other. The strength of the writing in this game cannot be understated. It is at once funny, charming, biting, and melancholic. I loved a particular moment where Kay is helping Yu take her eardrops, which she hates doing and complains about how it feels. Such mundane relatability grounds these characters despite their extraordinary circumstances. The bulk of Haven involves exploring landmasses and cleaning up a substance called rust. As someone who loves clearing out maps, this was candy to my brain, as I reveled in the icon "Islet Cleared" appearing on the screen. Maybe I'm weird, but it's the same sort of weird satisfaction I get from fully vacuum cleaning a room. The combat is certainly unique, allowing you to control both characters at once, performing blocks, blasts, and duo moves to pacify your foes. It reminded me of Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, where my brain had to split itself in order to maintain 2 separate entities. Overall, Haven succeeds in crafting the type of relationship that is so rarely portrayed in video games, and thoroughly excels as a result. Number 9, Streets of Rage 4. Beat-em-ups are probably one of my least favourite genres in video games. If you hand me any random Metroidvania, I'll probably play it without thought, but it takes a very special beat-em-up to even register on my radar. It is astonishing to me then that I not only played Streets of Rage 4, but I absolutely loved it. This is hands down one of the best looking games of the year. The absolutely gorgeous animation is half the reason I kept playing. When Blaze Fielding does her little hair flick at the end of a level, it absolutely sends me. Now, that's not to say I only enjoy Streets of Rage 4 for its aesthetic, because far from it. As someone who is absolutely terrible at these games, I was glad to find how approachable the easy difficulty was, as some other games that I've played in the genre don't often get that right. Its willingness to be a modern game, and therefore more accessible, is something I wish more beat-em-ups would do, as opposed to sticking so rigidly to the past. The multiple playable characters allow for a variety of playstyles and speeds, and the special system where you risk your health but can gain it back added a tension that only enriched the action. However, Streets of Rage 4 mainly gets on this list for having one of the most satisfying gaming moments of the year, bouncing a crowbar off an enemy's face, then catching it again, and repeating until the item is broken. God, I cannot emphasize just how good that feels. This is easily the best side-scrolling beat-em-up I've ever played, and I think it will take a lot to top it. Number 8, Ghost of Tsushima. It is rare that a AAA open-world game will catch my attention. There are so many of them, and they are also cookie-cutter that they often fail to ping on my radar. However, there are the rare exceptions to this rule, and one such studio that has earned my trust over the years are Sucker Punch Productions. As a huge fan of the infamous series, I was primed to love Ghost of Tsushima. Sucker Punch makes games that are unabashedly that, video games. Want to get on your horse? Easy, it'll teleport right to you. Picking up loot? No worries, you barely need to be close to it and it'll pop into your inventory without a long, laborious animation. Here's looking at you, Red Dead 2. The fluidity of these systems transfer into the flow of combat, where parrying your foes and utilizing your ghost weapons will make Jin Sakai a one-man killing machine before you know it. The game isn't shy about refilling your arrows or darts or smoke bombs, so I abused them constantly and was rewarded with a sense of superheroic invincibility. The one-on-one duels are also stupendous, and while they don't quite hit the heights of something like Jedi Fallen Order's lightsaber fights, they are thrilling and invigorating affairs. The combat is probably the best I've played in an open world game, and so activities that I usually totally ignore like bandit camps ended up being high on my checklist. And don't get me wrong, this game is totally one of those, by which I mean a checklist game. But the small additions and the overall polish make it absolutely one of the best one of those in a long time. The win system that directs you towards objectives helps to keep you out the menus and constantly checking your map. And the birds or foxes that pop up in the environment are good enough at distracting your attention that you'll end up doing 3 or 4 things you weren't intending to before reaching your destination. All this alongside a vision of ancient Japan that is absolutely stunning. I used photo mode to take more photos of virtual Tsushima than I think a lot of real tourists did when they visited the actual island. To say the scenery is breathtaking would be a gross understatement. It may lack real innovation, but Ghost of Tsushima does what it says on the tin, and a whole lot more. Number 7. 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. Visual novels are one of those genres that I have become more and more fond of over the years. Whether it be the plucky lawyer Phoenix Wright or the murderous high schoolers of the Danganronpa series, suffice it to say that some of my favourite games come from this genre. It's no surprise then that 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim caught my eye. I mean, let's be honest, how couldn't it? Vanillaware are lauded for their jaw-dropping art design. The backdrops and characters that make up this 1980s/future 2000s aesthetic are a sight to behold. The way in which light refracts through windows, or the animation of Megumi Yakushiji's hair as she walks through the corridors are stunning artistic achievements that I wish more games would attempt. But the real star of the show here is the storytelling, which has you switching between 13 different characters, all out of sequence with one another, as you slowly draw clues from one narrative to the other in order to understand what is really going on. In short, 13 teenagers are going to pilot mechs to try and save the world, but how they get there and where they all come from are the main mysteries that drive this time-travelling sci-fi plot. I will admit that it didn't quite hit the landing for me, but even when I called certain twists, there are at least 2 more that blindsided me. Voice acting is tremendous across the board, with each of the 13 protagonists having defined personalities and growth. Standouts for me were Natsuno Minami and her robot BJ, and pretty boy Shu Yamaguchi, who has a mysterious J-pop idol talk to him through his TV each night. The whole cast is memorable, so much so that I can remember 13 full Japanese names a month after playing it. It's an achievement, people. Alongside the storytelling, however, is a real-time turn-based tactics game that is surprisingly fun. I know a lot of people have said this is one of the weakest aspects of the game, but I had an absolute blast with it. Using your teams of 6 mechs and their incredible abilities to slow the tide of endless kaiju was a ton of fun, as well as surprisingly strategic. Even on normal, it's pretty easy, but I had a great time blowing stuff up. If you can handle a bit of anime nonsense, then you'll find a deeply complex narrative here with twists and turns aplenty. Number 6. Spider-Man Miles Morales. So let's get this out of the way. I didn't play Miles Morales on the PS5, so it's not getting an automatic bump on this list just because I've been wowed by a new console. Rather, Miles Morales gets so high here because it is a reminder of just how much fun I have with these new Spider-Man games. I think it's official that Insomniac have the best feeling movement mechanics of any AAA studio out there. Between the Spider-Man games and the criminally underrated Sunset Overdrive, they are my go-to developer when talking about open world traversal. I just can't overstate how amazing it is to swing around New York. I mean, after I finished the campaign and had no other side quests to do, I kept swinging around the city doing literally nothing else just because I didn't know when to stop. If that isn't testament to the pure mechanical joy this game brings, I don't know what is. But Miles Morales also has a great story at its heart. His journey from the other Spider-Man to Harlem Spider-Man is as heartwarming as it is fraught with drama. I really appreciated the addition of Danica, the progressive podcast host, as a counterbalance to the alt-right coded conspiracy theorist Jonah Jameson, who continues on with his inane talk show. It means that even while you're swinging from place to place, little pieces of narrative are being delivered to spruce up the downtime. Combat gets an upgrade with Miles' Venom powers, and I found myself absolutely loving his combination of gadgets and attacks. Drawing enemies together with a gravity well, only to pop them up in the air with a Venom jump, was a combo I went back to many times. And although stealth becomes a far more viable option here, I always found it far less interesting than jumping into the fray and fighting foes head on. But the best part of all of it is that it doesn't overstay its welcome. We need more short AAA games, and Miles Morales proves that you can have a fulfilling and satisfying experience without it needing to last 40 hours. It may not bring much new to the table, but I absolutely could not put this game down, and that is testament to just how damn great it is. Number 5. Spiritfarer. It was about 25 minutes into starting Spiritfarer that I realised it was instantly going to be a Game of the Year contender. It makes an incredibly strong first impression, from the absolutely gorgeous visuals and animations to the charming and sometimes somber writing. Everything about Spiritfarer is lovingly crafted. It takes cues from the farming sim genre, as well as visual novels, and in some ways even Metroidvanias, to create a wholly unique cocktail of an experience. Though you start off with a small ship and group of crew members, you slowly begin to explore and expand the oceans of the afterlife. At times I would completely forget to point my boat in a new direction, as I was so caught up in cooking, smelting, shearing, or the innumerable other activities you can get up to in maintaining your ship. I love the loop of setting a destination, getting tasks done in between, and exploring that new area for materials. There are certainly moments where you might be wandering around for a while not really knowing what to do next, but through it all I never got frustrated as the game keeps such a chill tone. As Stella, your main goal is to ferry all these spirits who have passed into the afterlife to their final resting place. And so Spiritfarer is as much a game about building relationships as it is about saying goodbye. One of the most effective ways that the game gets you to care about your crew is the unique ways in which you can give each of them a hug. I can't think of many games outside of Boy and His Blob where hugging is a core mechanic, but Spiritfarer proves that it can be one of the most wholesome ways to connect a player to characters. Not every crew member was a favourite, in fact there were a few I just didn't like, but the varied cast makes for interesting and nuanced stories across the 30-hour playtime. My enjoyment of Spiritfarer came in waves, much like the movement of the ship itself, as there are certainly moments of downtime where not a lot progresses as you figure out your next goal. However, the highs are so high that it carries itself above much of that monotony. The other crazy thing about Spiritfarer is that, for a game which is ostensibly very chill and low-key, it has fabulous platforming chops. Sliding down roofs and jumping off as your momentum carries you feels so fluid. I honestly wish the game had more complex platforming challenges just because the movement is so amazing. I could go on about how the building process is so fast and streamlined, and about how the sheep shearing animation might be the best looking animation in any game I've ever played. But in the end, Spiritfarer is more than the sum of its parts, and a beautiful nautical journey that I highly recommend you take. Number 4. Animal Crossing New Horizons. Thank God for Animal Crossing. Honestly, has the timing of a game's release ever been more perfect in the history of humanity? I know it's been a terrible year for most people, but in the midst of the chaos of our society, Animal Crossing was there with open arms to welcome us all in. And welcome me in it did, to the tune of 140 hours, almost double the amount of time compared to my other most played game this year. When you play games like I do, that is an anomaly, but it makes total sense when you think about how comforting Animal Crossing is. I enjoyed New Leaf, but after 50 hours all I was doing was going to that bug island at night and endlessly grinding, and it stopped being fun. However, the genius of this game is that the credits roll at the point where most Animal Crossing games start. The whole notion of building your entire town from scratch on a remote desert island was honestly the perfect direction for the series to go in. One of my favourite aspects of Stardew Valley was the freedom of customization I had with my farm, and Animal Crossing just took that to the next level. Being able to pave paths, build fences, bushes, place houses, even have the ramps to get up to higher areas, the flexibility far surpasses any previous entry. Even the inventory expansion and the crafting, though they still have problems, are welcome changes that made Animal Crossing feel fresh all over again. I had the goal of building a restaurant with a giant music stage behind it, and I was able to make it a reality. Everyone's town looks so different, and that is testament to the customization options on offer. And speaking of community, half my enjoyment with Animal Crossing were those aspects. Sending gifts to friends, hanging out on each other's islands, trading recipes, and most important of all, playing the Stork Market. I reconnected with a bunch of people from my Pokemon days as a result of turnips. What a wild thing. But aside from all the changes, the core of Animal Crossing remains intact here, and it's as welcoming as ever. This world is just so delightful and easy to relax into that it's no wonder I spent so many hours on my island just watching the world go by. Number 3. Final Fantasy VII Remake. I honestly can't believe it. I can't believe this game not only came out, but that it's as good as it is. Final Fantasy VII Remake should be a disaster by all counts. Square Enix haven't had the best of luck with the franchise for the past decade or so, outside of the miraculous rebirth of Final Fantasy XIV. Hell, this game was originally going to be developed by CyberConnect 2, a company known for making mediocre anime games. It was doomed, right? But somehow, they bloody did it! Final Fantasy VII Remake is an absolute triumph, and by far my favourite big budget game this year. I played the original Final Fantasy VII about 5 years ago, having never gotten to it when I was younger. I'm always skeptical of games from the N64 or PS1 era, as they hold up pretty poorly from a visual standpoint. And yet despite those shortcomings, I had an absolute blast with Final Fantasy VII. It has a great cast of characters and a tremendously fun battle system. And you know what, folks? I think that Remake is even better. Yes, sure, this is only the first, 1/5 of the original game, but the ways in which they expanded the characters, making someone like Jessie into an actual person, has made a whole world of difference. Tifa and Aerith are standouts, with both having complementary arcs that both intersect with Cloud in meaningful ways. Cloud is his usual brooding self, but throughout the game you start to see that veneer crumble, and Barrett and Marlene are one of my favourite father-daughter relationships I've seen in a game. Each of these characters feels familiar, and yet even more developed, which is aided by a solid script and wonderful voice acting. Hearing familiar musical themes punctuate important story moments hit me with nostalgia, even though I didn't grow up with the original. But there is a haunting echo of the past that runs through the various musical themes of this game. The real star of the show, however, is combat. Gone is the turn-based system from the original, replaced by a mix of real-time and menus, where you can pause the action to switch between characters, cast spells and perform special moves. And it's fucking phenomenal! I don't know how they did it, but they retained a sense of the classic game while also making it feel so amazingly modern. The slow motion on animation effects when you pause the game allow you to appreciate just how gorgeous it is. Tifa is the MVP, with her moves flowing seamlessly into each other in an acrobatic dance that is reminiscent of fighting game combos. Seriously, I know I talk about animation a lot, but the level of detail in her every movement is just stunning. I cannot praise this combat system enough, and I hope it is iterated on for the next installment. I absolutely dissolved myself into this game, dumping 40 hours into it in the space of 10 days, and I couldn't have been happier to do so. I did every side quest just to stay in this world longer. If this is the future of Final Fantasy, I could not be more excited. Number 2. Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Look, okay, this is impossible. I didn't want it to be this way, but here we are. Ori and the Will of the Wisps is one of the best Metroidvania games ever made, exceeding its sequel in a multitude of ways, and yet only comes in at number 2 on my list. If I'm brutally honest with you, I didn't want to choose a single number 1, but I felt like that would be a cop-out. Ori is the best game I've played this year, alongside my number 1, so take that for what you will. In any case, having just wrapped up a hard mode playthrough, I can confidently say that this game is jaw-droppingly phenomenal. I adore the first game, and it is among my favourite games ever made. Will of the Wisps just expands every good thing about the original. There is no question that this is one of the most beautiful games of all time. From the luscious lakes of Luma Pools to the creeping caverns of Moldwood Depths, with its skittering bugs and glowing tendrils, there isn't a single location in Ori that isn't outstanding visually. The way in which the environment bends and bounces under Ori's feet as you hop from place to place lends a real sense of tangibility to the world. The light glow that Ori emits can also be seen reflecting off of every surface he's nearby, as he both physically and metaphorically brings light back to a dark world. But for every quiet moment, there is also spectacle, thrilling boss fights and escape sequences that show off how stunning this game can truly be. If I were to have one critique of the game, it would be that the escape sequences aren't quite as good as the first game. Look, it's hard to beat the Ginzo tree, but I just wish that these ones were a tad harder. Even on hard, I blew through them all first or second time. I don't know whether I'm just better at playing Ori or if they are substantially easier, but more challenging versions would have been welcome. But alongside those chases are the boss fights, which actually utilize a fully fleshed out combat system, and man, it is good. At times it feels like you're playing Devil May Cry, juggling enemies in the air, dodging out the way, reflecting projectiles back. It is a true dance and a thrilling challenge. Any game that lets enemies hurt each other is fantastic in my book, and there were multiple instances where I would rocket a bashed enemy into the path of an oncoming projectile to my utter jubilation. Alongside the light sword, you have a variety of weapons, each of which is viable. On my recent playthrough, I went the unconventional route, starting with the throwing shuriken, and it completely changed the way I approached combat. There is a depth here that I didn't expect, and the incredibly tight controls alongside one of the best dodge rolls in video games makes the harder combat sequences a joy. That said, the platforming that made me fall head over heels for the first game is still as present as ever and adds multiple additions to the moveset that makes traversal an absolute joy. I won't spoil some of the endgame upgrades, but suffice it to say, Samus and her space jump certainly have a rival by the time Ori is done. The truth is that I finished this game not a week ago, and I already want to jump back in and play it again. It is so rare to have a game that gives me that sort of compulsion, but Ori and the Will of the Wisps is absolutely the peak of the genre for me, and I expect no other studio to top it aside from Moon Studios themselves. Number 1. Hades. Hades. Hades, 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 Hades. This has been my brain since Hades came out, and it just hasn't abated. Every day after work, do a run of Hades. Have a spare few minutes before dinner, do a few rooms of Hades. It's 10 minutes to midnight, and I should have gone to sleep already. Hades. I can't believe how good this game is. I don't think this is true of any piece of media because objectivity doesn't exist. But, subjectively speaking, for me, Hades is a perfect video game. I seriously cannot think of anything wrong with it. It is polished to a sheen. It plays immaculately. It has some of the most charming writing and excellent voice acting in the medium. It has astonishing gameplay pacing, and it rewards you despite being from a genre that is rarely about consistent progression. Long have I admired Supergiant from afar. I never clicked with Bastion, and since then have always meant to play Transistor and Pyre, but Hades had made me a believer. At its core, Hades is just a phenomenally made action game. I have long held the belief that so long as a game mechanic is inherently enjoyable to engage with, that's enough to keep me hooked. And Hades has perhaps the most perfectly balanced set of mechanics I've ever seen. All 6 of the weapons feel fantastic. I don't have a favourite because my favourite is the one I'm using at the time. Every build feels viable. You may get a Zeus Poseidon death combo with the spear, or a trippy cast build with the bow. The variety is astonishing, and every combination is a thrill. I've had runs where I think it's all over, only for one boon to click into place and all of a sudden, I'm wrecking my way through rooms. It is testament to Hades and its progression that at first I didn't know if I was going to be able to beat it, but I did. I didn't know if I was going to be able to beat it 10 times and hit credits, but I did. I didn't think I could finish every Pact of Punishment, but I did. And I didn't think I would have finished the game 36 times, but I have. And every time I get to the final boss, it's still a goddamn thrill. Though I've long since finished the main story path, Hades gives you reasons to keep playing. Optional romances, reuniting lost lovers, giving nectar to all the gods, it just keeps on giving and giving. The strength of the writing cannot be overlooked, with next to no repetition in dialogue, and characters that change and react as your actions dictate. I adored Dusa, the nerve-ridden Medusa head who is the Underworld's maid, and where that narrative goes is unexpected, yet feels so true to her character. Meg's voice melts me every time I hear it, and your father Hades is terrifying, yet deeply complex in equal measure. And then we have the best gaming moment of the year, when you stumble across Eurydice's room in Asphodel as you hear her rendition of one of the game's best songs, Good Riddance. To this day, every time I get to that room, I set down my Switch, pump up the volume, and listen to it all the way through. The soundtrack is absolutely tremendous, with heavy guitars and bass throughout. I particularly love when you've cleared a room and the only sound left is that of the bass lightly thumping in the background. From the legendary aspects of the weapons, to the mirror upgrades, to the list of minor prophecies, there is always something to progress towards in Hades, and even when you've done all of that, the game is just still incredibly fun to play on a deep mechanical level. I don't often know when a game has entered my top 10 of all time, but Hades is easily in my top 5 without hesitation. I don't understand how a top-down action roguelite is one of the best games I've ever played, but that's why Game of the Year is often about surprise for me. Ori might even be higher on my personal favourite games of all time list, but Hades came out of nowhere to completely knock me off my feet, and that is why I must award it my Game of the Year for 2020. Well, there you go. There's my top 10 games of the year for 2020. They were good. A lot of them were very good. I enjoyed playing them a lot. It was fun. Honestly, like, those top 2, they are basically just both number 1. I can't... it's impossible. It's the hardest choice I've had to make. Ever in the history of video games. That's good, right? It means that video games were good this year. They were very good and very nice. I'd like to give a shout out to a few that didn't make the list. Shout out to Paper Mario the Origami King, just beautiful, great writing, combat system, not great, but you know, that's why it didn't make the top 10. Monster Train is brilliant, loved Monster Train. If you like Slay the Spire, check it out, it's really good and does something a little bit different with the kind of card-based roguelike thing. Tremendous game. And you know what, Last of Us 2, you're okay, I guess. Gave it a lot of shit. Deservedly so, in many ways, but you can't fault those performances, you know? Those cinematics are probably the best in the medium, really, unquestionably. I don't know, maybe Neil Druckmann should go make a movie instead of a video game instead. I mean, I guess he's making an HBO series, so there you go. Cool, well, that's it. That's the video games of 2020. I hope you enjoyed this list. I'll be back next year with probably something else. Until then, appreciate you, I love you all. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye, folks.